I mean, we are absolutely at the year's worth of rain in a day phase. And my conclusion, just reading biblical text, historical text, accounts, previous writings of extremes, they used to keep journals a lot of times, a decade of rain in a day. That is what is next. If it continues on the trend, but I just don't see anything slowing down. And I'm always asking, why is the world changing so much right now? I'd like to get your opinion. Like, why now is all this change coming? It's not organic change, it's forced change. So why right now? Couldn't they have done this 10 years ago?
But the Earth's magnetic fields certainly seem to be weaker than they were 20, 30 years ago. And you can just tell that by the observation of the sun, by the color of the sun, the way that the sun feels on your skin. Boom. Ladies and gentlemen, we just look at it. David Dubine, Add Up 2030. We're going to talk about it. The world's gone crazy, literally insane. And I don't know if there's any slowing down in sight or if it's just going to gain more personalities. But David, you're on the forefront. Your house and your homestead got hammered out there in Tennessee. I really like how you are the change you want to see. I remember when we first met several years ago, you were in the process of, I think, moving out of Hong Kong. And if I remember correctly, and now you've got a homestead in Tennessee, and you're living it, you're doing it, you're working it, but you're also dealing with the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, aren't you?
Well, we weren't hit that bad comparatively to all these just ruined places in North Carolina and East Tennessee. I mean, I'm so grateful and so thankful that we only had, in my retrospect, like minimal damage, like some roof damage, some trees down, fence repairs, like you just things flipped over, doors coming off, banged on the hinges and twisted. That's nothing. I mean, nothing in comparison to truly what happened with the flooding up there. And then Spain today, I don't know if you saw that, Spain got a year's worth of rain in a day. Like the Hurricane Helene was once in a 2,000-year flood that came down, and they got, 30 plus inches in a few hours. And remember, Rex, when we talked about this many a year ago, I said, it's going to go from like extreme flood to a month worth of rain in a day to a year's worth of rain in a day. And that will be just the trend moving forward. And here we sit, do that full loop circle since LeakCon back then. And we are at a year's worth of rain in multiple locations, including Saudi Arabia, including Oman, including Yemen and Spain and Morocco. And it just keeps building the number of places. And now I do believe there's a couple places in South America that were hit. If you go to this site called thewatchers.net and SOT.net, they consolidate a lot of big like weather events. I mean, we are absolutely at the year's worth of rain in a day phase. And my conclusion, just reading biblical text, historical text, accounts, previous writings of extremes, they used to keep journals a lot of times, a decade of rain in a day. That is what is next. If it continues on the trend, but I just don't see anything slowing down. And I'm always asking, why is the world changing so much right now? I'd like to get your opinion. Like, why now is all this change coming? It's not organic change, it's forced change. So why right now? Couldn't they have done this 10 years ago, 20 years ago, to get more control over the populace? Everybody keeps trying to deflect and go, oh, it's control the populace, control the populace. What if it's not? What if it's something far different? They could have done any of these maneuvers in history from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s to control the populace, but they didn't. Why now is so much forced change here to control, at least on the outside, excuse the populace? I'd love your answer. Nobody likes getting older. One of the biggest reasons why is because our muscles become weaker, making the activities we used to enjoy more difficult to do and less enjoyable. But what if you didn't have to get weaker as you got older? What if you could actually become stronger? Celebrity fitness trainer Tony Horton says he's found a way to turn the impossible into a reality. It's a method anyone can do that takes about 1 to 2 minutes a day, and within a very short period of time, you can start to feel stronger, probably healthier than you have in years. Health experts have long believed age-related muscle loss is simply an inevitable aspect of getting older, but Tony Horton says he's found a much more effective way to help you fight age-related muscle loss and even build new muscle. In fact, the results have been so remarkable, Horton is now the subject of a short report detailing exactly how his body strengthening method works. It's online for free for the public to view and share. Go to tonyprotein.com/adapt now to watch the video yourself. That's tonyprotein.com/adapt. Or click on that link in the description box below and find out now.
I don't have an answer. I have theories. It seems like 2030 is a key date for whatever reason. And I've thought to myself, I've gone really deep down the rabbit hole, and like we were talking off air, why is the world so out of control? Like let's put the weather to the side for a minute. Everything else at the higher levels that are being promoted in the media, not everything, but much of what's being promoted seems to be just twisted or off or discombobulated. Something's not right. And I'm thinking, why now? Why now? And the thought that came to my mind was there is something around 2030 that's going to happen that I have it's like a return of something. I don't know if it's a return of a breakaway civilization or an asteroid or what, but something around that time frame. And the people that are running the show in the public realms they're like given a task, and that task is you need to have the population in order, and that order needs to be created out of chaos by 2030, or you're not going to reach your parameters. You're not going to reach the task. Like, what's another word for task?
Like your goalpost or something like this. Well, if you're looking in a business sense of it, you're not going to reach those benchmarks or something,
That's the theory that I have. And I think it goes back to a certain place. You know what, man? I think it's the Middle East. I think that there's a super intelligence that's running the show, and it uses the Bible and scriptures as a way to keep people under control, and religion to keep people under control. That's my theory.
Now you're talking a long-term cycle. So coming out of the Younger Dryas era, when society restarted, post exit of the glaciation, say 17,000 years prior to say 15,000 years prior, we were coming out of full glaciation. We'd been stuck in ice for, the better part of 80,000 years, and population was squeezed right near the equator. And we were coming out of that. And that natural flip, whatever it was, the current flowing back into our star that reignited that, put that plasma sheath around to set off a lot more heat, suddenly started melting ice all over the planet. And then here comes the Younger Dryas impact. Boom, comets on ice sheets, air bursts, multiple places across the planet. It wasn't just over Canada. It was kind of, tracked across the planet as our planet was spinning. And that set us back. It plunged global temperatures, 10 degrees Celsius in just weeks, if a month at best. And then, we scraped along there for another 1,000 years and whoosh, right back out as quickly as, after the cloud cover, and the heat was still coming off the sun. It was just our local region that had been cloud covered and water saturated from that event. And then we begin history as we know it, but not right then. I'd say 10,000 or 9,000 years ago. It didn't really start all the way until 7,000 years prior. So where was that 3,000 years of missing time, people, history, society, civilization, construct, government, or whatever it was? There's 3,000 years of a missing piece there. And I do believe that we're into a longer term cycle here. So if we go previous times back, and I would even challenge you to say, go back to the last interglacial, say 118,000 years ago, like what was going on then? Like what kind of constructs were there? What kind of government was there? What types of militaries there were there? Because they are exactly anatomically the same. There's nothing different from us and those persons of the same interglacial one time prior and two times prior to as well. If you're going to go 220,000 years or 225,000 years ago, they had that interglacial. So we've had two interglacials of 10,000. We're on the third one of 10,000 years of warmth. Same body, same mind, same, the magnetic field might have been different. So perhaps the way they were thinking would different, and going around the Yuga cycle would probably have been at a different point versus exiting out of the very dark Iron Age, coming out into this warm period. But we're missing a lot of pieces, and something does return. And I'm not going to say, and I'm not going to go out there and say Nibiru, because if it was really that close, their planets would be out of their orbits by now. Like traditional orbits, like if you just had a backyard telescope, you would see something's in the wrong place. And then we're just not seeing that. So I would say spiritual realms, absolutely. Interdimensional realms, oh yeah, because that wouldn't affect gravitational third dimensional realms in terms of atoms, molecules, planets, orbits. But in an interdimensional realm, absolutely it could. Just saying for role play exercises.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about this then. The Nibiru theory, I completely agree. There would be some type of physical evidence if it was close enough where we would see it even with the backyard telescope, no question. So we can cross that off the list, at least as far as being close enough to observe. The next theory is the sun and the observations with the Earth's inner core. And they're using seismic data. I'm sure you've read the paper also that suggests that the inner core has slowed down substantially. CNN even, and that's when I say substantially, let's put it into perspective. It's like microscopic speed, but it's done it
I think
enough.
it's not even a full second, but it's somewhere in that range.
Yes, right. And so if that paper is correct, and if these scientists are accurate about the Earth's core slowing down so much that it's potentially reversed, and that there's some cycle associated with that, we're looking at the aurora borealis right now in places that you usually don't see it. The sun being at a solar maximum is a cycle of 11 years, so that happens every 11 years. But the Earth's magnetic fields certainly seem to be weaker than they were 20, 30 years ago. And you can just tell that by the observation of the sun, by the color of the sun, the way that the sun feels on your skin. So my theory is the sun is definitely involved. The Earth's inner core is involved. But what is the outer source of that? What is causing the magnetosphere to weaken, the core to change? And what I would think of would be some type of either manipulation of the environment through artificial means, or something that is not visible, that's natural, that's causing this big shift. And I don't know what that would be. So maybe all this industrialization is having an effect, but in ways that we don't understand.
It's possible. You got to think about the radio frequency waves that are on the surface of the planet all the way up with our satellites orbiting that are now creating an intertide grid. It's almost like putting a frequency field around. But again, the universe is so large. And I mean, just our star in comparison to the Earth is just so gigantic comparatively, 1.2 million times larger. So irregardless of what kind of tech we had, you think that something that's a million times larger plus would outweigh whatever we could put up there, even in a frequency field. But there's many times in history of accounts through you're familiar with it too, of many ancient cultures talking about the Earth stopping and then rotating and spinning in the opposite direction.
Right.
Stopping for 3 days, stopping for 8 hours, completely stopping and reversing. And then the sun rises in the west and sets in the east like multiple times. It seems that, and we're not talking, 50 or 100 or 2 million years ago, something like this. We're talking like several thousand years ago, according to the Chinese.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the Magi and the Arab star watchers, and so many accounts through history, the Mayans talk about it. I mean, there's times that it's a full reverse, but it's time where time slows down, where you might be in the daylight or on the nighttime for, far longer than the regular duration of what would be sunset and sunrise, like an additional 8 hours or an additional 12 hours of darkness or heat. And that would affect plant and animal life, and a lot of things would get scorched or cold in that time. And by the way, one last thing, solar maximum this time is far, far, far maxity max compared to what anybody out there was predicting. I was predicting that it was going to be declining in terms of magnetic strength, and we were going to head into a grand solar minimum. Not this cycle, but almost every space agency is pointing to, after we come off this one, that next cycle is the one that's going to have really low solar activity. So nobody got it right this time. Not a single person on this planet forecasting got this solar maximum correct. Not a single person. It is so far above even the wildest projections on how active it would be that something is definitely amiss. That if everybody on the Earth that's supposed to be an expert got it wrong, and it's way far above that, then maybe that's that last boom of an engine, when they get that last piston and then the engine dies and you run out of gas. Because something strange is going on where our modern science can't predict closely enough. We're orders of magnitude above. So again, there's so many things in play right now, but really, how's that affecting the human domain here on the planet? also? And how can that be ridden on top of to achieve a greater outcome?
When we look at the recent eclipses, that the totality paths and some of the towns that were close to the totality, not directly under, but many of the towns that were within a certain proximity, and the biblical references, one person might look at that and say, "Oh, they knew, they knew because it was prophecy." And others are going to say, "No, they knew the totality of the eclipse because they know the movement of the stars and the planets, so that they can forecast that out into the future." And the uninformed will think, "Oh, it's prophecy," and the informed will know that it's actually a part of the mechanics of the universe. So you could call it prophecy, but it's also the mechanics of the universe. So they're both right. But those that know about the prophecies can live their lives and build their empires around those prophecies. And so with that in mind, I think that there is a group of people that know the future based upon the movements of the stars and planets. They know the missing link that creates these massive influxes of weather change patterns, etc., hurricanes, climate change, whatever you want to call it. The climate's always changing. I understand it's always changing, but they know when these epochs happen, and they build their empires around these events. So if you are a part of a society, of a group, of a civilization, of a dynasty, of a what's another term for secret society?
Yeah, I mean, it's been so obfuscated with all these words that are thrown around everywhere. Now when you say it, oh, it just relegates you to kind of the dustbin of history of like, oh, you're talking about the Illuminati. Okay, but there has to be a better term for that of, if you go back to the Crowley kind of doctrines, like those subsets of those that are into the magic world that understand the intersection of solar activity in that magic world. I mean, I'm not into that magic world, but I understand the solar activity, and I understand how those two could be blended, because I'll say the barycenter. I'm not familiar if anybody understands the barycenter. We will be almost nearly at the center of how our solar system, relative to our viewing position, it's going to be back at center 2030. So I rewound all the way back to 1400 using some software, and there was the nearest one that could be found was 1492. Yeah, and 1811 was another one. That's right before the War of 1812. And then I was looking around somewhere like 1860. It wasn't happening. And then 1990, but then this one at 2030 and the one in the 1650 was the closest ones I could find that were similar above the eclipse. Because once you run the model around, you start to get a lot of geometric shapes in there, of the barycenter being way off to the left, right, east, or of our position, north, south, east, west, X, Y, Z axis, depending on, you can't really do that in space, but you got where your axis would sit. But once you run it, you start to get a bunch of geographic shapes, and where the sun spun through right nearly that center between two other geometric, like concentric circles there and ovals. Yeah, it's a 400-year, space of time between that, approximately. It's not exact, so it's not like this is the date. But it does seem there's some longer term cycles, and also very few people are looking at the barycenter in terms of this usage of energy, because I was talking to Jim Lee, and he was telling me that corporations did a huge amount of studies, spent millions and millions in research on just following our full moon to new moon cycle and seeing people's emotions in there, and then what was a good time to sell to them. And then governments took it on and saw when there would be a passive phase, when there'd be an aggressive phase, this sort of thing. But the same thing rung true with corporate entities that were trying to sell product at a time. They mapped it out, and then if you scale it out, you come into the Strauss and Howe 4 turning. But if you scale that out, you're coming into like centennial minimums, grand solar minimums, and you scale it out and you start to come, where's the barycenter sitting in that too? So it all does have, and the stock market is well-known, established science for like hundreds and hundreds of years on how let's say, the thought of humans on the possibility of exuberance or fear based on solar activity in terms of driving markets for longer term periods of time. Generally, at a solar maximum like we are now is the highest the stock market will be. And after we roll off solar maximum, generally you come on to, well, a stock market collapse or correction, however you like to term that. But everything is so tied to the heavens where we sit. The energy is flowing in directly from the center of our star, off center, just there's so many things to put equations into. And then, you talk about the Schumann resonance and, the KP index, and there's so many things that can affect humanity's thought process at any one given time. Like that would be a pretty complex algorithm to roll out, but I'm sure it's been done, and not modern time. I'm talking like thousands of years ago. Thousands of years ago.
Oh, sure. I mean, the ancient civilizations even go back to ancient Sumer. They were heavily influenced by the stars, the movements, the constellations, and that would link up to their empire and their dynasty and their laws and regulations. So there's that connection with obsession or excitement towards the stars. The question is 2030. Let's go back to this 2030 event. Is it because of an alignment in the stars? Is it because there's going to be something that's going to happen to the earth where it will create more chaos if we don't have order up to that point? And so they're just doing everything they can. And I'm saying I'm talking about those in the know that seem to be the modern sorcerers and wizards and warlocks and witches. Are they doing their best to get people in these like pockets or, some type of get their thumb over them to where they can have control? So when this event takes place, people aren't just going to go and take down the masters, basically.
Well, that's the only reason I could see it. A lot of people are talking about it's control for this, it's control for that, but it's simply just maybe they know one of these, excitable chaos periods coming in, and that would be the time in, 400 or 500 years of that particular period would be like the apex pinnacle of if they were going to get overthrown, that would be it. So, there's a lot of layers where people are trying to say it's this, it's this, it's this. They're trying to throw you off on 1,000 breadcrumbs, but maybe it really is that simple. It just boils down to the barycenters at the closest center as. So I encourage everybody out there to barycenter. And also another thing to look at is as it's moving around in its counterclockwise motion, notice when we come to the apex where it's apex, and then on the decline down on the events around in the United States, or I'm focused on the US, but generally it would be around every single continent. On the apex, once we reach that apex, and then the downfall, and then the events that occur during that time, and then we reach the bottom, those same events that bring back the exuberance. So I'm really thinking it's a fear and exuberance cycle that is the barycenter, that maybe is the key to unlocking a lot of it. But I really think it's that simple. The people that have been in power know that this time is with the barycenter as center as it can be in several hundred years. If there was going to be something where they would lose power, it's really that simple. They just want to keep power. And there's none of all this other nefariousness that people are talking. Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Now there's a lot of different models as well. You can run the barycenter. Look for barycenter 2030, and they should show you they'll show you where it is. Yeah, 2030, and that should pop up. Here's some different images. And if you go to images, I'll choose the one. I've been looking through this stuff for the last couple months. It's the black one on your left. And there's a couple other renditions too with a little bit brighter lettering and coloring. Like the models I was running with didn't have a lot of, there you go. So right there's your 2030. Look right in the center of the sun. Well, perceived, again, it's a perception, the solar system perceived to the actual sun itself. So again, it's all about perception from the viewpoint. There we are, 2030. That's about exactly as precise as you can get in the center there. And you really need to trace back into the 1400s, 1632. Rex, I can send you a few. Why is it directly in the center and everything's focused around 2030? Now, like, I don't have a specific single event that's tied into 2030. I just hear it. It's referenced everywhere. You can't get away from it, literally. It's literally everywhere. So what is it about this 2030 thing that's so important that everybody has to know? Everybody has to be wrapped up, but your entire consciousness needs to revolve around it. It's in
Just be
Okay,
nice.
you got a big one there. On the right side, it says September 30th. What's that? 1492.
1492. Yeah.
Okay, so I put the opacity on the sun, and this model has run for 400 and so about 400 and plus years. So I only went back to about 1400 AD or so because I didn't want to go further back. So I set the thing at 500 years to go back. So here, this is the total over 500 years almost of looking at this spinning, and you can see it wiggles verily. It's not always at the center. You can see how wide it comes out. And I was trying to also put at the furthest, widest reaches of this, as far as it can go out, what happens at those points? That's my next set of study versus being right in the center and looking at some of these events on the center. So when we look here, wait that 12 o'clock position, like what happened up there? And this thing, the only drawback with this model is it does not put the years in it. So when you're doing it, you actually have to stop the model and then mark the year, and then, you put your own hashes on it. And that's one of the drawbacks of this. It doesn't insert years for you. So, look at the 12 o'clock position and look at the 3 o'clock and the 9 o'clock positions. Like what's happening at those furthest reaches out or what's happening in the direct center. And then 1632. And then here we are. Okay, 1772. Now, notice where the sun's position is. And then if we come up to 1811, right there, it's almost right at the center as well. And then if we squeeze back up to 1990, it's very close to the center again. And then if we come up to 2030, we find that. And those are the only times going back into, nearly 1400. That's it. Those are the only times.
Looks like it's above this or above that, the sun. In the 20.
Yeah, it's above this time. It's above the cross point there. Why don't I zoom that in for you? Okay, so this is where it's going to be in 2030. It's going to be a little bit above where the actual, if you were looking into a scope, the actual center. But notice the geometry where it sits.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's in that very center of the center of the
the
geometry of that, right?
The Pisces viscus or something like that?
Yeah, the Pisces. Because if you follow that down, it does look like the tail of the fish there in the Pisces, right?
The return. When's the return of Jesus in the scriptures?
Yeah, I haven't run this model back to, if you would go back 2,000 years in each, processional cycle, and I guess I haven't run the model back that far. I don't even know if it's going to be valid back that far, but I'm wondering if you come to something at the Taurus where it would be at the top of or in the center of what would be considered the horns or something like this. Yeah. So here we go. This is 1990. Again, it's not really exact. This is a little bit off. So it's close. Like what events happened in 1990? Can you remember? And then we'll roll this back to 1811, just before. This is actually on the eve of the War of 1812. But notice where it's also at two crossing lines, not exactly in the center of that geometry, but getting close to the center. Yeah. War of 1812 starts, and the conditions are set for that. Now, if we come back to 1772, which is a few years before 1776, obviously an important date. We were in the middle of the Revolutionary War by this time, and also, getting more into the full-blown end of that. And again, where does the sun sit? Similarly up to what would be the nose of the fish, perhaps. Gets close.
Yeah.
And then if we come back to 1632, this is like the most precise. I mean, this is as close as it possibly gets, at least in the last, say, 480 years or so. All right. And then if we come all the way back here, it's a little bit below the ecliptic this time. 1492, another important date. Columbus sails. Why'd they wait? Well, he could have sailed at any time. They knew the continents were there. The maps were there. They already had it. They understood, but they waited till this. So this is an important construct too, above and below the ecliptic, apparently, as we view it. And that's it. And that's and those are my barycenter points here.
That's really cool. And the reason I brought up the reference of the scriptures is in the New Testament, Jesus's followers say, "When will we know of your return?" And he brings up like Jonah and the well or Pisces in some way, a reference. And then when I was looking at that, it looked like the sun was right above the fish almost. So it was like getting ready to consume the sun or something along those lines. But I find it very interesting looking at that geometry, and I wonder if there's a way that we could connect it to the fourth dimension, like the literal fourth dimension, and if there is some type of interdimensional influence based upon the alignment with this chart and the sun and where we're located. how would we connect that to a 4D chart to see if there's some type of nexus point? That would be very interesting. I mean, that would make sense if there's so much influence based upon where the stars and the planets are, and the influence on the planet and the people on the planet and their actions, their movements. Well, if we bring up the next dimension, possibly the fourth dimension, that could be the nexus point, because of their location connected to where the 4D is, and where because we can't see these things in the 4D. It's beyond our perception. And so we're only seeing the 3D aspect of it. And that's just what's coming through my mind as we're having this conversation.
Now follow me around. We're going counterclockwise on the barycenter. So this is now, maybe it's just I'm reading something into it. I don't know if I am, but I'm just asking for a little advice here. Maybe you could follow along. So if we go where it says barycenter with the cross hash mark in the center, and you just go directly north of that, you come to the year 2008. That's the year of financial crisis. And then we come down 2009, 10, 11, and the financial crisis kind of resolves itself around 2012. And then we really start to, make some headway of recovery in 2013. And it comes all the way to 2019 and 20. And what happens in 2020? And then we are all coming down that trajectory again, all the way until 25, 26. The economy is going to take a hit here as we try to restructure things. Either way it goes. But then it suddenly comes and gets a little better end of 26, and then all the way until when? Just around 2031. And then look at the complete incredibly long arc coming out of that period all the way until 2044. That's a full 10-year to come down through the bottom and up. Where generally from 2008 to 13, you're talking a handful of years. From 2020 down to 26, you're talking a handful of years. But if you're looking at the barycenter, and if there is some truth to this being the exuberance or the fear base of how humanity is energy-wise, then that arc coming off of 2030, 2031, that is going to be an incredibly long time of whatever goes on until it flips over around 2044-ish. And a lot of conjecture around then of a supernova and different types of things. That's really far out. But you can see how this barycenter does its thing. So am I reading too much into it from the 2008 financial collapse and then the COVID coming in 2020? And that's why when you go back to some of these other ones there, Rex, on that previous barycenter chart that you showed too, like the start and the end of the Vietnam War is in that one. And there has to be something energetic here that's going on.
What if 2030 is when the masters wake up from their hibernation chambers, their stasis, and it's connected to this point? Like they have in the technology to wake them up at that point in time because of the energy of the universe for whatever reason.